The year is 1890. You walk down the New York streets and turn into a small alleyway. You see shattered windows boarded up with rotting wood, piles of broken glass, garbage, and ash. Jacob Riis, a photojournalist at the time, describes the view. Quote, "Dirt and desolation reign in the wide hallway, and danger lurks on the stairs." End quote. Boys and girls are lined up against the walls, resting, covered with dirt. They are without shoes and find comfort within each other. It was a time where half the world did not know how the other half lived. It was a time when people with power and money had a choice, to live their lives or to help people struggling. Jacob Riis made the choice to help, and his actions changed history. Jacob Riis used his skills as a photojournalist, writer, and lecturer to expose the living conditions in the New York tenement slums. Riis created a new social responsibility for journalists to use their skills to document problems in their communities and to help advocate for the rights of others.
Jacob Riis was born in Riis, Denmark in 1849. Alexis O'Neill, author and historian, states that
he was 12. He actually collected up all the money he earned from chores and he brought it over to Rag Hall and left it there for the tenants there. So very early on, he had empathy for the poor and he had sort of like a call to action.
He left Denmark in 1870, chasing after his love, Elizabeth Jorts, who he ultimately married and had 5 children with. Riis arrived at a time of tremendous change in the United States. It was right before the start of the Gilded Age, a time when there seemed to be more job opportunities. Immigrants chased these opportunities and settled in cities like Chicago, Boston, Pittsburgh, and New York. Jacob Riis will soon realize that the wealth and power was concentrated in the hands of a few, creating a sharp divide between rich and poor. There are common problems amongst these cities, including issues with housing, sanitation, and health. At the same time, other reformers were fighting for social and legal rights in urban areas, including working to prevent child labor and improve working conditions. In his first few years in New York City, Jacob Riis chased opportunities for himself. In 1877, he landed a job at the New York Tribune as a police reporter, stationed on Mulberry Street in the Tenement District. This is where a large portion of the people, especially immigrants, lived in about 38,000 tenements, organized into ethnic communities like for the Jews, Italians, Chinese, and other immigrant populations. This is when Riis gained knowledge of what street life was like in New York. Riis reflected on this time in his life. Quote, "My first assignment as a reporter, stayed 25 years, not willingly after 1 year wanting to get out, was made to stay. Compelled there to see the seamy side of everything, I looked behind the gore and the grime of it for the cause." End quote. Riis used his First Amendment right to freedom of press, which allowed him to publish ideas and news without government censorship. Riis knew he was in a position of power to advocate for the social and human rights of the people in the tenements to safe housing and access to basic human necessities. In 1888, Riis started working for the Evening Sun. This is when Riis started producing photographs of the slums that later would be turned into wood engravings and half-stones to go with his writing. His photography about poverty showed an honest portrayal of the people amid horrible conditions. According to Riis, these tenements were, quote, "cramped, poorly lit, underventilated, and usually without indoor plumbing. Rooms were 12 by 12 with 5 families living in it, compressing 20 persons of both sexes and all ages with only 2 beds. The tenements were hotbeds of vermin and disease and were frequently swept by cholera, typhus, and tuberculosis." End quote. Emma Beckerman, a newly arrived immigrant, describes the tenements from her perspective. Quote, "The furnishings were worn and shabby. 4 rickety chairs, a scarred wooden table, a leaky icebox, and a rusty coal stove greeted us. The bedroom contained a sagging double bed and a broken-down bureau." End quote. The tenement owners were only after rent. Nothing was said in the contract about either the safety or comfort of the tenants. This is an example of how the city's government and landlords lack responsibility for making tenements safe. Despite the harsh conditions, residents were incredibly resilient and created homes through family, culture, and community, even if the homes were temporary. Tenants decorated apartments, had family dinners, and connected with other immigrant families to help each other navigate through these hard times.
Riis's attitude towards some people in the tenements reflected the racism and classism that was common at the time. One of his photos was of a man sitting on a barrel called the Tramp. According to Riis, quote, "One of my visits to the Bend, I came across this fellow sitting, and he struck me as being such a typical tramp that I asked him to sit still for a minute and I would give him 10 cents. That was probably the first and only 10 cents that man had earned by honest labor in the course of his life, and that was by sitting down." End quote. He described the Italians as thieves and criminals, and he described the people living in the Chinatown tenements this way, quote, "Stealth and secretiveness are as much a part of the Chinaman in New York as the cat-like tread of his felt shoes, and the average Chinaman would rather gamble than eat any day." End quote. Despite his judgment, Riis hoped people would gain a sense of responsibility and help improve tenement conditions. To do this, Riis lectured around the country to expose life in the tenements. He exercised his First Amendment right to freedom of speech to continue to make a change. His first lecture, How the Other Half Lives and Dies in New York, was in 1888. He used a projector for 2 hours, showing the harsh tenement conditions to persuade his audience. He targeted the middle class, who he believed would feel bad about what was happening, and the Christian community, which he was a part of and one of his biggest donors. As Riis was gaining support, critics such as Father James B. Curry, a New York priest, accused him of exaggerating the slum conditions. This criticism was somewhat valid, as Riis was trying to create images that would get people to care. In 1889, he used his money from lecturing to found the Jacob A. Riis Settlement House, a place where the poorest people of New York had the right to access nutrition classes, healthcare, childcare, and recreation. Until the end of his life, he never stopped donating. In 1890, Riis wrote How the Other Half Lives, documenting life in the tenements. Theodore Roosevelt, the Civil Service Commissioner of New York City at the time, saw his photographs and felt a responsibility to help. This started a bond that lasted through his career and until Riis's death. The two took walks around the tenements, observing the conditions. This is when Riis's responsibility for the people of New York City expanded, as the two discussed housing issues, police corruption, and other urban problems. After 1895, Riis took very few photographs of his own, focusing on his political career alongside Roosevelt. Roosevelt spoke highly about Riis and his work, quote, "The countless evils which lurk in the dark corners of our civic institutions, which stalk abroad in the slums, have met Mr. Riis in the most formidable opponent ever encountered by them in New York City." End quote. Upon being elected governor, Theodore Roosevelt advocated for housing reform. In 1901, the New York legislation signed the Tenement House Act the same year Roosevelt became vice president. Some argue that the act would not get to the main causes of the issues, which were also connected to lack of education, access to good jobs, and fair pay. However, the law did improve safety and health issues, banning the construction of non-ventilated housing and slowing the spread of disease. Buildings had to have outward-facing windows, indoor bathrooms, proper ventilation, and fire safeguards. Now, the landlords and building owners had a legal responsibility to keep people safe, even if they did not yet feel a social responsibility to do so. Inspired by Riis, Roosevelt demonstrated empathy during his presidency. In 1902, Roosevelt fought for the rights of coal miners to have a 9-hour workday as well as a 10% increase in wage. Riis was in the president's inner circle, and they remained friends until Riis's death in 1914.
Riis's efforts inspired others to carry on the responsibility of urban housing reform. The 1937 Housing Act demonstrated the federal government's responsibility to ensure decent and safe housing for low-income families. In 1965, President Johnson signed a law establishing the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to oversee the newly funded housing programs. Today, the New York City government is still working on taking responsibility for the housing issues. In 2024, they passed a bill to build 82,000 new homes across the city to address housing issues. Jacob Riis redefined the field of photojournalism. It was not just about giving information to the public, it was about taking powerful photos and exposing the real story. Quote, "I was a writer and a newspaperman, and I only yelled about the conditions which I saw. My share in the work of the slums has been that I have not had a 10,000th part in the fight, but I have been in it." End quote. Riis's techniques inspired the next wave of photojournalists. Lewis Hine documented the Ellis Island immigrant arrivals and the harsh conditions of child labor. Dorothea Lange captured life of farmers during the Great Depression, revealing Americans struggling through economic hardship. Gordon Parks exposed issues like poverty and racism during the Civil Rights era. Today, photojournalists use social media as a gateway to reach more people, hoping viewers will feel responsibility and take action. Riis was considered one of the earliest social reform documentary photographers, establishing a new responsibility of photojournalists to use their skills to inform and advocate for the rights of people who have little ability to advocate for themselves.